And hearing him blame Halyna in the interview and shift responsibility to others and seeing him cry about it, I just feel like, are we really supposed to feel bad about you, Mr. Baldwin?
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, there you heard it's actually Halyna's husband. I think the pronunciation of her husband really settles it. It's Halyna. And he actually says that Halyna is blamed by ALEC Baldwin for kind of her own death. And where does that actually come from? Well, it comes from this portion of the interview. It's from part 2, about just under 2 minutes into part 2 of the 3-part exclusive interview. Let's listen in.
And she says to me, hold the gun lower. Go to your right. Okay, right there. All right, do that. Now show it a little bit lower. And she's getting me to position the gun. Everything is in her direction. She's guiding me through how she wants me to hold the gun for this angle. And I draw the gun out and I find a mark. I draw the gun out, I find a cut. And what's really urgent is the gun wasn't meant to be fired in that angle.
Now, the interesting thing is, if you stick with this whole psychology that it is Halyna who's saying to him, this is how you need to hold the gun, this is where you need to point the gun. So Baldwin is just a passive player in this. He is being told what to do. Halyna is telling him what to do, where to point the gun. So it's not a case that he pointed the gun at Halyna. It's kind of that Halyna got him to point the gun at her, if you want to believe that. And so, as I say, if you take this thinking a little bit further, around about 40 seconds later, in the same clip, Baldwin then kind of acknowledges that he actually prompted the cinematographer saying, how about this? Shouldn't I do that? And you've kind of got to ask yourself, in a scenario where you have a lead actor, and a lead actor like ALEC Baldwin, you have ALEC Baldwin also writing the script, who's also a producer, right? Do you really think that he's going to be completely passive in a story where he's the titular character? I mean, the movie's name is Rust, and he is playing the lead character, Harlan Rust. And are you telling me that he's not going to have some say in how he wants to be conveyed in his own movie? And so this is where he kind of touches on the other side to this whole idea that she's telling him what to do. Listen to this.
But we kept doing this, and so then I said to her, now in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. And I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off. I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
I personally find it quite weird how Baldwin describes this, and even the host, the interviewer, doesn't really know, is this actually when the moment happened? He sort of, the way Baldwin describes it, it is left almost to the imagination to fill in the blanks, to fill in the narrative, and then that is what the host does, and then he asks all sorts of questions. And the pertinent question is, did you pull the trigger? And this is Baldwin's face. This is his reaction when he's asked that question. It looks like he almost stares into the camera. It looks like he's kind of thinking in a certain way. But it's just a strange, it's a strange look on his face, I thought. And obviously, that is something that Halyna's husband also responded to. This idea of an absurd claim that the gun kind of magically went off. He didn't pull the trigger, just went off by itself. But, there's something terribly and tragically ironic in the emotional narrative surrounding the Rust incident. You have a multi-millionaire actor going on television, this was December 3rd, stressing that he's not the victim and shouldn't be given special treatment, only to make the surprising, some would say absurd claim that the gun in his hand did magically go off. And then doesn't he kind of come off as the victim? That he does kind of seem to want special treatment?
My concern is that I don't sound like I'm the victim. Because there is a victim. There's a woman who died. And my friend got shot.
Do you notice he doesn't mention her name?
I really feel like I can't wait for that process to end in February, March. I mean, I'm not asking them to speed it up for my benefit. That's ridiculous.
Once again, if you watch the first clip in the context of him saying that Halyna told him to where to point the gun, right? Then he actually says that there's a thing that all people do. It's sort of collaborative with the, I think it's the art director, but it's also the cinematographer, where you decide between one another how you're going to shoot a scene. And so it's collaborative. And in a scenario where you are the author of your story, you've written the script, you're the lead actor, you are the person with the vision, and you're actually going to be telling the cinematographer, this is what I need you to do. And she's going to be saying, well, I guess we could do it this way or that way. But who do you think is really calling the shots in a scenario where someone has to pay for the movie and Halyna is employed by somebody to make the movie? So who do you think is calling the shots effectively? Do you really think Halyna is calling the shots? Now, cowboy movies are all about fiction, but have you ever seen a cowboy movie ever that has someone shooting someone and then saying, it wasn't me, the gun pulled the trigger? Ironically, the script for Rust does actually deal with a youngster, quote unquote, accidentally shooting someone, going on the run, the law going after him, and the boy's grandfather, Rust, riding into the rescue, guns blazing. Life imitating art? But it's also ironic because in Baldwin's version on ABC News, it was difficult not to sense a minimizing of the situation, especially where he said, someone is responsible, but not me. Baldwin's legal position has also been to say, as I understand it, effectively, get your compensation from employment insurance, not from me. It's minimizing his involvement to a mere employment dispute. Is that what this is? Somewhere else I also saw that said, you need to, an actor needs to be able to rely on the armorer. Okay, fair and well, then why don't you hire an armorer who is mature, professional, who has the experience, especially in a set where there's going to be a lot of arms, and there were a lot of arms on the Rust set. So if you're going to put the responsibility on the armorer and say, you know what, it's the armorer's fault, blah, 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 because the actor needs to rely on the armorer, well, why would you not get someone reliable with experience, and, why wouldn't you do that? Was that done in this? Then, in terms of minimizing, it's also interesting that Baldwin corrected his host, saying, no, I would never point a gun at someone and pull the trigger.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
That's a strong statement, but isn't that what happened? I mean, the gun was pointed at someone. His argument is that no, he didn't point the gun at someone. Someone told him to point the gun at someone, and so someone else is pointing the gun, if that makes sense, but the gun is in his hand. But then somewhere along the line in the interview, he does say, how about this, how about that? So was he not suggesting where he should point the gun from his own version of events? Anyway, the bottom line is the gun was pointed at someone while it was in his hand, and the trigger was pulled, whether by Baldwin, by some mysterious entity, or by the gun itself, some kind of ghost in the machine. In Brian Panish's animation, unless my eyes deceive me, it looks like Alec Baldwin points the gun at 4 individuals and then he pulls the trigger in the video. And 2 of those individuals are seriously injured, 1 fatally. The bullet seems to narrowly miss at least 1 individual. But according to Baldwin, he didn't pull the trigger. In Baldwin's version of events, he also said this, I thought she fainted. And he also says, I stood over her for about 60 seconds. And I think he's asked, was she conscious? And then he says something about, according to my recollection, yes, that's all. And then he also goes on to talk about the notion of live rounds. And he was the last person to guess what had happened when we went through this in the previous series, where it seems like immediately everybody else knew exactly what happened. But in terms of all of those things, I thought she fainted, I stood over her, let's talk about the notion of a live round. I had no idea what was going to happen. It didn't seem serious. I think he even said that. It didn't seem like a situation that was life and death. And I think he also said, it still doesn't seem real to me. We see how distancing was used to put the focus on Baldwin and the gun and his knowledge of protocols, instead of putting the focus on the critically injured Halyna, right? And that is the value of Matt Hutchins coming onto the scene now, because he is redirecting our attention, I think, to where it needs to be, to Halyna, right? In some of the recent coverage dealing with Matt Hutchins coming forward, breaking his silence, it also refers to someone else who came forward and broke his silence, but kind of during the end game of the shooting, of the movie, but where it was now day 20. What was it? I think halfway through the 21-day shooting schedule, on the 21st. Lane Looper, he was one of the disaffected crew. He was actually someone who was working with Halyna, right? He was kind of Halyna's right-hand man. She was quite sad when he left. And Lane Looper walked out on the morning of the fatal incident. And I think it wasn't actually him, it was somebody else. Another armorer who didn't accept the job actually blamed himself, thinking, if he'd taken the job, he could probably have prevented this from happening, another armorer. That's how someone is taking responsibility, even though they weren't even there. Anyway, Lane Looper said, in my 10 years as a camera assistant, I've never worked on a show that cares so little for the safety of its crew. Now, in my own investigation of these events, going back several months, from the sarcastic T-shirts to the sarcastic and callous texts, it does come across at times that the show, whether you want to call it the show, the producers, the set, those in charge, whoever, but the show seem to care very little for its crew. In English, there's a word for care so little. It's the word careless. And this happens to be the legal test for the producers on Rust. Were they careless? Did carelessness and recklessness lead to Halyna's death? Was the carelessness willful and wanton? When Matt Hutchins is on camera, there's no minimizing of Halyna, no distancing, no disassociation. In a real sense, Halyna's husband recalibrates not only where our attention should lie, but where our sympathies must lie, with the victim, with Halyna, with Halyna's family. He also highlights the appropriate emotion for me, which isn't confusion or uncertainty. It's like someone's responsible, but I don't know. The appropriate emotion is anger and righteous indignation and urgency. Someone needs to stand up and take responsibility. I think those same feelings, anger and righteous indignation, were also felt by the disaffected crew. It's quite an interesting parallel, wouldn't you say? One way to test whether there might have been carelessness, this is in the sense of lacking of caring, or not caring enough, or just not caring, is to look at the events following the Rust incident, what I refer to as post-meditation. And what do we have? We have Baldwin saying he didn't feel guilty. We have Baldwin saying he had no idea what happened. We have Baldwin seemingly not rendering aid to Halyna, who was right in front of him. And this is actually mentioned as part of the lawsuit, this fact. And Baldwin seemingly going back to his life as normal, going back to work, doing a true crime podcast, heading to Britain to film another low-budget flick, buying a new pad in Vermont. Meanwhile, you've got a medic who's so traumatized, she can't even go back to work. And she wasn't even there. She wasn't there when it actually happened. Whereas Baldwin was, and he seems to be fine. When it comes to the Rust incident, his Instagram at turns seems flippant, as though he has other fish to fry. I mean, take the amount of content where you actually see or hear him talking about Halyna, where he actually acknowledges it. It's totally outnumbered by other things, and often silly things. Now, although Matt Hutchins is clearly angry, indignant, and hurt, and who wouldn't be, he nevertheless strikes me as very measured and a very cool-headed individual, a very different personality to Baldwin. I sense steely determination and careful, controlled, intelligent releases of emotions at the appropriate time from him. But bear in mind what Lupus said. He said, in my 10 years as a camera assistant, I've never worked on a show that cares so little for the safety of its crew. If that's true, where did this culture of caring so little come from? Generally speaking, and this is for people involved in movies, generally speaking, where would you say the culture of any film emanates from? Where does it draw itself from? Where does the culture for a film come from? One thing that has been put to rest now in my mind is the pronunciation of Halyna's name. It's Halyna. If anyone would know, it's her husband. So from here on, I'll try to keep to the new format. You may notice the reporter doing the voiceover still pronouncing her name Halyna. In true crime, the details do matter. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.